welcome to Counterpoint. Krystal, thank you so much for joining us today.
It is my pleasure. And we start today with some fantastic news. Emily, you want to share the latest with regard to Ryan and his wife, who had a significant surgery yesterday?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ryan was actually able to post on X yesterday. Update, surgery today went very well. Doctors described it as a, quote, best case scenario. Thank you to everybody for the well wishes and the prayers. It means a lot. So Krystal, you just said best news. Yeah, I mean, this is fantastic and a huge relief for Ryan. So we're very excited for them and continuing to hope for the best.
Yes, absolutely. So he's with her today, helping her to recover. But we're really glad to hear that news. We've got a bunch of other world news, domestic political news to get to. Trump making some really significant comments, appearing to back down from his trade war against China. So a lot to say there.
Yeah.
We also got some numbers from Tesla, where their net income was down 71% in the first quarter. So things not going too well for Elon, Emily.
No, I was going to say, we had the whole show basically set yesterday, and we did it late. But even then, Donald Trump suddenly was talking about how, well, maybe the tariffs won't be 145%. We will get to that in a moment. We have video. We have more updates on how the tariffs are affecting the economy. And Krystal, a great guest lined up for today.
Yeah, Eric Blanc, he focuses on unions. He had a really important piece a while back in Jacobin talking about, debunking this myth that you can just put tariffs on and you're going to end up with manufacturing jobs, and that those are going to be good jobs. At the beginning of the turn of the century, the era that Donald Trump sort of idealizes under William McKinley, et cetera, factory jobs were not good jobs. They were dirty, they were dangerous, they were low wage, et cetera. It was really the union movement and a series of sort of historical events as well, the U.S. being kind of the only power in the world after World War II that enabled that dynamic. So we wanted to dig into that with him at a time when you're already starting to see actually manufacturing job losses because of what Trump has done on tariffs. So really excited to talk to Eric. We also, Emily, have a bunch of updates. Pete Hegseth seems to really be flailing. And, I rely on you heavily to understand what the hell is going on in this situation to the best that any of us know, because it just seems like a total and complete mess over at the Pentagon.
And both of us will be relying on Ryan, who will be with us in spirit to some extent, because he has a massive new scoop about what's actually going on behind closed doors that I have to say, I think provides maybe the best explanation. So everyone should stick around for that.
Yeah, he actually told me, Emily, that he was occupying himself working on that piece to distract him while his wife was in surgery. He was in the waiting room trying to distract himself to keep from going crazy working on this piece. So classic Ryan.
I figured that's what was happening because the piece ran while he was at the hospital. It was classic Ryan. But it's a very important story. We will get to all of that. We're going to do a check-in on the MAHA movement because there were a couple of pretty interesting developments that just happened yesterday. A new announcement about food dyes, but we also have some updates on how the FDA is approaching milk and other important questions. So we are going to go ahead and dip into MAHA world for a segment this morning. Krystal, we have some interesting stuff from the Dems, too. Rahm Emanuel went on the I've Had It podcast to sort of unload on his fellow Democrats as he considers a possible 2028 presidential run. It's so ridiculous to say that, but here we are. Gavin Newsom made new comments, and David Hogg continues to get pressed. We have quite an interesting clip of him and a conversation with Major Garrett on CBS News. So a lot to talk about there.
Yeah, indeed. And I know you love those ladies from the I've Had It podcast. You've been looking for a reason to pull some content from them and really uplift them. So I'm excited that we finally got you that chance, Em.
Yeah, I do. I have like a burning bias against them based on Bravo World. But anyway,
I didn't know they existed until recently. You know who clued me into them was actually Pisco, who you guys had on to talk about immigration. He was like, I think you'd love these ladies. Sure enough, I do love these ladies.
That's hilarious. Well, we'll hash this out. I'll clue you in on all of the Bravo drama. But before we do that, we will get to 60 Minutes having its executive producer. Only the third person to ever lead the show as executive producer, by the way. That's
wow.
Yeah, it's a crazy fact. But left the show yesterday with a complaint about lacking editorial independence amid CBS's battle with the Trump administration, or I guess its efforts to placate the Trump administration as they duke it out in court. So some interesting stuff going on behind closed doors there, and it's probably representative of a broader struggle in the media too, Krystal.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we jump in, thank you guys so much. We've been getting a bunch of new premium subscribers. You guys made it possible to have the Friday show officially locked in, which we're really proud to be able to do. If you can't buy a premium subscription, we totally get it. If you can if you can share, the podcast in particular, if you can share, if you can leave a review, all of those things really help us. So thank you guys so much for your support. And Emily, you want to go ahead and tell the people what Trump had to say about the trade war yesterday?
Let's do it. Let's move to these comments that Donald Trump made at the White House yesterday evening as he was discussing the tariffs. We can go ahead and roll A1 here.
145% is very high, and it won't be that high. It's not going to be that high. It got up to there. We were talking about fentanyl, where, various elements built it up to 145. No, it won't be anywhere near that high.
What level do you think it'll come down to if you haven't?
It'll come down substantially, but it won't be zero. It used to be zero. We were just destroyed. China was taking us for a ride, and just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. We're going to be very good to China. I have a great relationship with President Xi. But they would make billions and billions and billions of dollars a year, and they would build their military out of the United States and what they made. So that won't happen. But they're going to do very well, and I think they're going to be happy, and I think we're going to live together very happily and ideally work together. So I think it's going to work out very well. But no, it's at 145%. It will not be anywhere near that number.
So that was at about 5:15 in the evening, and we're going to get to this in a moment, but came after Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, reportedly in a private JP Morgan meeting, had been saying something really similar. And Krystal, we have a lot of elements to get to in this block, but I want to just camp out on this point quickly and get your reaction because—
this is huge.
Yeah, exactly. Because this is— we've gone through the seesaw for the last several weeks about whether the tariffs are— this is the Bessent distinction. What did he say? They are negotiable, but not a negotiating tactic. Right. And there's Donald Trump putting it very clearly all on the table. This is just a negotiating tactic.
Right. And, I'm going to defer to Arnaud Bertrand had a good analysis of this. He says Trump saying the tariffs with China won't be anywhere near as high, ironically, is probably going to have an even worse impact on the U.S. economy in the short run, because if you import stuff from China, number one, you're going to wait until the tariffs come down. You're not going to be, oh, yeah, let me pay the highest possible rate right now. So that's going to compound shortages right now in the immediate term, because people are just going to wait out now that Trump has said this is not going to stay where it is. And then he says you're going to be less motivated to look for any alternatives or establish certainly domestic manufacturing. Why would you go through that effort when the president has already told you this is not going to last? Which, again, he says is why Trump's approach is anything but 4D chess. He's basically negotiating with himself in public and making the business environment for U.S. companies utterly unpredictable and chaotic. And I think all of that is really well said. Obviously, Wall Street is going to be super happy to see him climb down from, 145%. I think the China tariffs were even technically higher than that at this point, but you get to a certain level where it's just like, okay, we're just not trading with China outside of these few exemptions that Trump put into place, which were significant, which had to do with, a lot of high-tech items that we are not going to be producing in the U.S. anytime in the near term. But, we've been saying, Emily, from the beginning that a trade war with China, even under the best circumstances, was going to be very difficult for the U.S. to win at this point because we are so reliant on them for so many things. And Trump did not set any sort of conditions in which it was even theoretically possible that we were going to prevail in this, because he turned the entire world against us in the midst of, launching a trade war against not just China, but the entire world. And he's not doing any of the sort of domestic policy to assist U.S. consumers or U.S. businesses, which were, being slaughtered by these tariffs, especially small businesses. Like, there was no way they could survive all of this. So in every way, he went about this in just the worst, for his own goals, supposed goals, whatever those are. He went about it all in the worst possible way. And now, frankly, it's humiliating that he has to back down already in this very public way when China hasn't budged an inch.
Well, his strategy was dependent on maintaining this sort of bluff. And we all kind of knew, and there were hints of it, obviously, that this was just, I mean, everyone knew that this was a negotiating tactic, but what they didn't know is whether or not he would just say, like, screw it, keep it at 145, like, we're just gonna go full send for an indefinite period of time, even if this was always meant to be a negotiating tactic. So, but what he did just there is both take away his leverage, but also without providing certainty for domestic producers. And
Right.
so it's really like, not only is it not being augmented with the sort of policies that you would see domestically, not only is it not being augmented with a really coherent, so far, with a really coherent set of deals to reshore particular industries, to support particular industries, it's still like, it's just, as you just see from him right there, it's completely being dominated or defined by what he chooses to say on a daily basis, which is not at all helpful to the project of onshoring. And
Yeah,
Krystal, go ahead.
Just really quick, just to summarize, in terms of what he and his advisors claimed, there were a variety of goals that were claimed here, right? One of them was to get the Treasury bond rate down. That has gone in the opposite direction. And I do continue to think that is a significant reason. The fact that it was so clear the world was not fleeing to safety in U.S. bonds or in dollars. They were just fleeing the U.S. altogether. And I continue to think that was probably the most important reason why Trump is now backing down from this, because that was so incredibly, like, catastrophically, existentially disastrous for the U.S. economy. So fail on the Treasury bond rates. Supposedly, this was going to bring back manufacturing jobs. We're going to cover with Eric the way that manufacturing jobs were already taking a massive hit because of this policy. And then the other thing that you alluded to there, Emily, is, we're going to get all these great deals. Well, we have no deals, 0 deals.
Yeah.
We're at 0 deals right now. So, none of these purported somewhat contradictory aims were actually coming to fruition. And now Trump is sort of pulling the ripcord, saying, okay, we can't keep this up. This is just not going to work out.
And let's roll this clip of Harry Enton on CNN as we try to figure out why Donald Trump says the things that he says. What's sort of the backdrop? Harry Enton explaining some of the drama in the stock market, actually a historical parallel. So let's roll this next clip, A2.
The S&P has dropped the most under Trump for any president at this point in their presidency since the S&P 500 was in fact created back in 1957. And indeed, it is not anywhere close, folks. It's not anywhere close. Under Trump, it's dropped, get this, 14%. The next closest one was George W. Bush back in 2001, a drop of just half that at 7%. No other elected president at this point in their presidency saw a drop of 5% or more. So Donald Trump is on a planet all by himself, a planet you do not want to be on. The American people don't want to be on. Chance of a recession. You see, I have 4 different little metrics we can look at. JP Morgan, 60%. Polymarket, 57%. Reuters, 45%. Goldman Sachs, 45%. Blame Trump if there's a recession in the next 12 months. Look at this. A lot or quite a bit. That's the majority winner right there at 52%. A little or not at all, perhaps a little bit high, some might say, at 32%. But still here, the clear majority of Americans say that if, in fact, there is a recession in the next 12 months, which at this point looks about 50-50, the majority of the American public says that the buck will stop at the White House, stop at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
So, Krystal, to your point, there's a lot weighing politically on Donald Trump and, this idea, as they said when they rolled these tariffs out. I mean, they had, again, mixed messaging about how serious the, quote, short-term pain would be. Everyone kind of knew, it was very obvious there would be short-term pain, looking back to Ronald Reagan's presidency and saying he recovered by 1984 from the recession in 1981. But that gave them some comfort. And the question is, though, how long they're willing to stomach the short-term pain, and if the short-term pain is actually reflective of something that is a ship that's not going to be turned around by the time the midterms come, by the time there's another presidential election. Whether or not Donald Trump cares about that is a different question, but the politics of this are going to get pretty rough, and Trump seems to be responding to that too. Yeah,
I just have 2 questions. One of them is, all the the botchiest of the world, the people, the MAGA world influencers who were like making a name for themselves by being like, tariffs now, tariffs forever. This is the greatest economic policy. This is delivering for Main Street over Wall Street and showing the elites. Like, what's their reaction now going to be now that he's like, yeah, we're just not really going to do that anymore. I guess they'll go back to this will create jobs. Now they'll go back to Art of the Deal in the meme that shows him going back and forth.
Well, it's interesting because it's also like, where does he land on this? When he says it's not going to be 145, well, what does that mean?
What is it going to be?
80%? Does it mean 120%? Like, it's just so crazy because
it's going to be 144%.
144. And if it does remain something like 120, or he changes his mind. I mean, he's been, trying to maintain a bluff for a few weeks and then just comes out and says that on a day like yesterday. So it's really still very hard to know where this goes. But what we do know is that he's willing to make deals, and we just don't know where those deals are going to end up.
But is anyone willing to make a deal with him at this point?
Right.
I mean, I think that was you and Soccer covered this, like the Japan meeting that they came away empty-handed. That's part of what triggered, a market sell-off on that particular day, because the rest of the world is like, why would we make a deal with you? You people are crazy, and you can't even tell us what you want. Like, even if we want to make a deal, you don't even know what you're doing. So how can we even, settle on some sort of terms here?
Nobody knows because it's just Donald Trump. And, Scott Bessent can go out and make this sort of intellectual case for it and try to put like meat on the bones of the policy that Donald Trump changes when he speaks, just like because he's talking and he's in a question and answer session with reporters and ends up saying something that, maybe he didn't plan to say. But that doesn't reassure markets. It's not, and we should get into this, Krystal, because this was really interesting as it was happening yesterday. We can put A3 on the screen. This is the CNBC tear sheet just about how markets closed yesterday. So Dow jumps 1,000 points Tuesday to snap 4-day string of losses. That's where things ended up. But as the day was going on, there was some quite interesting movement. We can put the next element up. This is Joe Weisenthal noticed Scott Bessent gave comments that massively moved the markets earlier to a private JP Morgan event that wasn't open to the public or the media. What Bessent said was that, quote, the tariff standoff with China is unsustainable and that he expects the situation to de-escalate. That's per Bloomberg's description of what he was actually talking about. So we can put that element up. This is the next element. This is how Bloomberg, this was a JP Morgan investor summit here in Washington, D.C. It was not open to the public. And what Bessent was saying at the investor summit moved markets because when the Bloomberg report came out, it was kind of a preview of what Donald Trump would say later after the closing bell around 5 p.m. that they expect to de-escalate with China. Charlie Gasparino, this was later in the day as well. This was around 2:18 p.m. and it's the next element. He said, I've been told by a person close to Bessent, the reports on his remarks about a trade deal with China having been imminent overstate what he said. He meant that there is room for talks and de-escalation, but much also depends on China's willingness to compromise on trade as well. So Krystal, just stopping right there with the Charles Gasparino point. So Bessent says something behind closed doors that is on the same page with what the president says later in the day. But the Treasury tries to clean up, or the administration at least, tries to clean up the Bessent remark by talking to Gasparino and trying to downplay what Bessent said. That's my assumption. I mean, maybe it was somebody who was in the meeting who's not the administration. I don't know who the source is, but he says it's a person close to Scott Bessent. So I would assume that's somebody in the administration. They try to clean it up, and then Trump just comes out a few hours later and is like, we're de-escalating 145. That's a crazy number.
Yeah, well, and yeah, exactly. And to your point earlier, Emily, like, we all know that the only reason he climbed down from his original, like the insane original chart of tariffs, was because Bessent and Lutnick figured out how to get Peter Navarro away from him for a little while to be able to convince him and then type out the tweet in real time. So, hey, they were able to get his ear yesterday. Maybe today, Peter Navarro is going to have his ear and it's going to be a totally different approach. We have no idea. But to go back to the Scott Bessent comments and why this, I think, is quite significant is they're framing themselves and their defenders are framing themselves as, they're looking out for Main Street. Here is Scott Bessent giving market-moving information to insiders at a JP Morgan investor summit who had hours, and the markets were moving for hours. And people are like, why are the markets going up? Like, what is going on? Why are the markets going up? And now we know it's because all the insiders got this information that, hey, we're backing down on the China piece, and they get to benefit and they get to cash in. And the public gets Charles Gasparino coming out and whatever his sourcing was, oh, no, that's not really true. That's not really true. So, I mean, it's just, it reminds very much of the day that Trump spiked the markets with stepping back from his original tariff posture. And lo and behold, Charles Schwab is in the White House that day, and Trump's out there bragging about how he was able to cash in to the $2.5 billion on a single day. So there have been a lot of people who have benefited and accumulated vast resources because of these massive market swings that have been wholly engineered by this White House.
I kind of continue to think the tweet, or I guess the Truth Social post Trump put out that day, like all caps, it's a good time to buy, was a cover your ass post, knowing that, they're going to be, it's hard to prove a lot of this stuff, but it also just says, it gives everyone an excuse to say, well, we were listening to the president. Maybe they had information that wasn't public, but also maybe it was just a tweet. Like, that's where you're able to sort of land on all of it. But this is such there was a possibility, and I know you and Sagar have covered this a lot. There was a possibility, I think, for something that was upsetting to Wall Street, but coherent, and did induce some short-term pain, but was, I think, very clearly for the sake of long-term gain. And where we are right now on April 23rd is sort of Trump waving his wand in different directions every other day, and moving markets and affecting. I mean, if you think, like the Trump comment is it's very Trumpy and funny for a second, and then you're like, oh my gosh, small businesses who are trying to make plans around these tariffs, just at the whim of what the president decides to do on a given day, their livelihoods are affected by it. It is what it is.
If you're a small business owner, like, it's not just your business, it's your life. Like, people put their whole hopes, dreams that, lady I've talked about with the busy baby business, like, she leveraged her house to be able to expand into Walmart, and it's all on the line for them. Yeah. And so for this whole thing to be so haphazard and so casual and with no attention whatsoever to the cruelty that is entailed at the heart of this policy with regard to workers and with regard to small and medium businesses is just, it is astonishing. It truly is astonishing to watch. And now the only question left is, as I said earlier, I was like, I have two questions. One is about what are all the defenders going to say now? The other one is about how much damage has already been done. Like, even if, okay, let's say he fully backs away and, okay, we're not doing this anymore and we're just going to go back to more or less the status quo, whatever. Like, how much damage, how many businesses have already gone under? How many businesses are already so freaked out about whatever the hell he's going to say tomorrow or the next week or 90 days from now that they're just like, I'm freezing investment. We're already seeing layoffs. We're already seeing huge freezes in terms of, businesses investing for the future. So is that all going to just magically reappear? Are we going to have shortages and messed up supply chains for a long period of time because of this huge disruption that was engineered by this administration? I think there's probably going to be a lot of fallout, even from what has already been done, not to mention the way that the world has now significantly moved against the U.S., as evidenced by, gold going up and the dollar weakening against basically every currency, and, Treasury bonds moving the opposite way of what you would expect if there's a flight to safety. I think some of these things, there's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube.
Probably true. And it just doesn't have to, that's again, what's so frustrating is it doesn't have to be this way. Whether or not you sort of come to this question of protectionism from the left or the right, there's a pretty good argument for some targeted tariffs. And again, if you're a free trader, you absolutely hate that. But there's a pretty good argument for some targeted tariffs. Even I think, and Sagar and I think I agree on this, there's a decent argument for the 10% global tariff. It's not like the craziest thing in the world. But But it doesn't have to be done in a way that leaves people stressed every single day with no clue what's going to happen next. Like, yes, the uncertainty, I think, was an interesting leverage point for the time leading up to Liberation Day and the immediate aftermath of Liberation Day. But then what did the administration do to actually seal these deals with all of these different countries? What did they do to augment domestic industry that was going to be hit so hard by this? None of it had to be this way, even if you support the end goal. Maybe you do it from the left or the right. It just didn't. This doesn't have to happen like this, and that's really sad at the end of the day.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.